Before the segment even started, the tension was already leaking through the walls. Not shouting, not chaos, just quiet pressure, the kind that builds when two people walk into a room carrying different versions of truth. Mark Wahlberg sat still in the guest chair. Polite, controlled, but anyone paying attention could tell he was watching everything. George Stephanopoulos gave his usual opening. Clean, friendly, scripted for comfort. We're joined this morning by actor and entrepreneur Mark Wahlberg. You've seen him on the screen. Now he's here to talk faith, fitness, and the future. Mark smiled politely. That's the idea. But George didn't stick to the script. He shifted, voice still pleasant, but edged. Mark, before we get into that, some people have raised questions about your public statements. About faith, about politics, about the kinds of people you align with. The smile on Mark's face didn't move, but the room did. The audience went quiet, and what was supposed to be a soft segment had just turned into something else entirely. George Stephanopoulos didn't blink. You've talked about faith a lot lately, about values. But some people are asking, whose values? What message are you really trying to send? Mark Wahlberg's voice was even. I'm not sending a message. I'm living a life. If that bothers people, maybe they should look at why. George leaned in. So when you post about prayer, about discipline, about patriotism, are you aware of how political that sounds in today's climate? Mark sat forward. You're the one making it political. I talk about showing up for your family, for your God, for your country. If that's controversial now, maybe the problem isn't me. The studio air turned dense. Not angry, just focused, like everyone had stopped breathing at once. George didn't back down. But don't you think public figures have a responsibility to speak with care, especially when the world is this divided? Mark's reply came without pause. What makes you think I haven't been careful? And just like that, the power in the room shifted. Because it wasn't a celebrity under pressure anymore. It was a man done apologizing. George Stephanopoulos adjusted his posture. Tone still smooth, but more deliberate now. It's not about apology, Mark. It's about awareness. You know your influence. You know how your words are received. Mark Wahlberg's voice didn't rise. It grounded. Then maybe you should ask why people are listening to me in the first place. George raised an eyebrow. Meaning what? Meaning maybe it's not that I'm loud. Maybe it's that too many others have gone silent. The audience was still. Cameras kept rolling. But the casual energy of morning television had completely disappeared. George tried again. But when you align with people who push division. Mark cut in. You mean people who don't think like you? That landed hard. George blinked. And for the first time, there was no follow-up ready. No polished deflection. Because Mark hadn't come to make noise. He had come to draw a line. And he had just stepped over it. George Stephanopoulos tried to bring the tone back under control. Mark, no one's attacking you. We're just asking the questions our viewers want answered. Mark Wahlberg tilted his head slightly. Then maybe your viewers deserve better questions. That didn't come out hot. It came out clean, like a man brushing dust off his shoulder without raising his voice. George exhaled. We have a responsibility here. To push. To challenge. Especially when guests speak from a place of influence. Mark didn't move. You don't challenge. You corner. You invite people on and wait for the soundbite that proves your point. The room felt smaller now. Not because of the cameras or the lights, but because everyone could sense it. This wasn't going to settle politely. Mark leaned in. Let me be clear. I'm not here to sell your version of me. I'm here to tell mine. And in that moment, it didn't matter who was hosting the show, because the guest had just taken control of the room. George Stephanopoulos sat back slightly, trying to reframe. All right then, what is your version, Mark? What do you want people to hear when you speak? Mark Wahlberg didn't pause. That faith matters. That discipline matters. That men don't have to apologize for leading their homes, protecting their kids, and speaking up when the culture turns backwards. George stayed composed. But don't you think that kind of language can alienate people? Mark's eyes didn't shift. If the truth alienates them, maybe they were never listening in the first place. A few people in the audience exhaled, quiet, almost nervous. Because the tone of the interview had crossed into something rare. It wasn't a clash between egos. It was a refusal to bend. George tried one last time to hold the reins. You understand this is a morning show, right? Mark nodded slowly. Yeah, and maybe it's time mornings stopped being about pretending. And right then, you could feel it. The person being interviewed had just become the one asking the real questions. George Stephanopoulos narrowed his eyes slightly. You came on here to promote a project, Mark. A film, right? We can still talk about that. Mark Wahlberg gave a half smile. Not hostile, just tired. The film's not the story anymore, is it? The audience didn't laugh, because no one thought he was joking. George glanced toward the crew, searching for direction. But the control room wasn't moving. Everyone behind the scenes knew. This wasn't the kind of moment you cut from. Mark looked out at the crowd. You bring people like me on for the numbers. You smile and shake hands. But the second we speak in a way that doesn't flatter your frame, we become a problem. George stayed quiet. Mark went on. This isn't journalism. It's filtering. It's editing real people into versions that make you comfortable. And just like that, the energy changed again. Because everyone watching knew what he meant. And deep down, many of them had felt it, too. George Stephanopoulos finally spoke, quieter now. Mark, no one's trying to silence you. Mark Wahlberg shook his head. You don't have to silence someone directly to erase what they say. You just have to twist it, clip it, cut it between commercials until it means something else entirely. He turned to face the audience again. I've played a lot of roles. Heroes, villains, underdogs. But when I sit in this chair, I'm not acting. And I won't let anyone here decide what kind of person I'm supposed to be. The room held still. Joy, comfort, branding. Those things had left the studio 10 minutes ago. George opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, Mark stood. Not loud, not theatrical, just done. I came here to talk like a man. You tried to turn me into a message. George stood too. Mark, if you leave now, this ends badly. Mark looked him in the eye. No, George. This ends honestly. And with that, he turned and walked off the set. Mark Wahlberg walked off the set without looking back. No wave, no exit smile, no parting shot. Just the quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly what had just happened. The cameras didn't cut in time. The audience didn't clap. And George Stephanopoulos stayed standing, staring into a moment that had slipped completely out of his control. Backstage, producers whispered urgently through headsets. Control room lights flashed. But the damage wasn't technical. It was trust. Across social media, the clip spread within minutes. Not because it was explosive, but because it was real. No edits. No spin. Just a man refusing to shrink to fit someone else's narrative. By noon, headlines were everywhere. Wahlberg walks off live. Faith versus filters on morning TV. Mark Wahlberg breaks the format. But Mark said nothing. No tweet. No follow-up. Just a single quote released quietly through his team that afternoon. If you don't own your voice, someone else will use it for you. And for millions of people who had seen the moment unfold live, it wasn't just a walk-off. It was a wake-up.